Is after President Trump authorized troops stationed at the southern border to use lethal force if necessary. Customs officials saying they hope it doesn't come to that.
We have been preparing for both, and that is why we've been looking at our fence lines. That is why we've been looking at our ports of entry and working with the Department of Defense on making sure that we are closing any gaps that we see out there with some obstacles in infrastructure. Obviously, what we are requesting and what we are expecting is the caravan members to follow the orderly process of applying for asylum, but we are preparing for the worst.
Brian Yenes is reporting from West Palm Beach near the president's Mar-a-Lago resort where he's staying this holiday weekend. What more do we know, Brian, about this new immigration plan?
Good evening, John. Well, the plan is called Remain in Mexico, and under the agreement between both nations, what they've decided is that those immigrants who are traveling through Mexico seeking asylum in the United States will have to remain in Mexico until their court case and their asylum case is processed. And from what we understand here with the system in the United States, that process could take as long as 2 to 5 years. Now, according to reports, the details are still being finalized. There has not been any kind of final signed agreement. We reached out to the White House for a statement. They neither confirmed nor denied the existence of an agreement. In a statement to Fox News, they said, quote, President Trump has developed a strong relationship with the incoming Obrador administration, and we look forward to working with them on a wide range of issues. Now, this agreement between Mexico's newly elected president, Andrés Obrador, and President Trump provides a solution to the so-called catch and release policy. The president has railed against that policy. Currently, immigrants who are caught illegally at the border and claim asylum, they are released into the United States until their cases come up. Critics say some never show up for their court dates and some get lost in the system. Now, the number of asylum applications has more than tripled over the last 5 years to 141,000 in 2017. There's a backlog of 318,000 asylum applications right now. Officials hope this new agreement will deter more migrant caravans from coming. There are some 5,000 migrants in Tijuana right now that are hoping to apply for asylum in that caravan. The mayor there is calling it a humanitarian crisis. Some 5,900 U.S. troops are on the border. They are unarmed and they are there to reinforce the Border Patrol. They've been ordered to potentially detain, if they need to, migrants, but only for just a few minutes. Because of the law, they have to then give those immigrants back to the custody of the Border Patrol. John, it's safe to say we can expect some legal challenges from this. Human rights activists are already saying this undermines immigrant asylum rights, and also there's a danger there, perhaps leaving these migrants in cartel-controlled territories along the border for months or years. John.
Meantime, Brian, there is also a report the president is growing more and more dissatisfied with his Treasury Secretary, Steven Mnuchin.
That's right, John. Look, the Dow just had one of its worst weeks of the year. The Dow down 4.4%, the S&P down 10%. I mean, that's correction territory. And the Wall Street Journal is reporting that the president is unhappy with these recent stock market declines, and it has drawn the ire towards Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin, mainly because Steven Mnuchin is the one who recommended the appointment of Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell. And Powell has raised interest rates 3 times this year, so far from 1.5% to 2.75%. And Trump has publicly said he thinks Powell is raising interest rates way too fast and it's stunting growth. In fact, he says he considers interest rate hikes the biggest threat to this economy. And last night, the president tweeted that this Wall Street Journal report on Mnuchin was not true. He said, quote, I am extremely happy and proud of the job being done by U.S. Secretary Treasury Steven Mnuchin. The fake news likes to write stories to the contrary, quoting phony sources or jealous people, but they aren't true. They never like to ask me for a quote because it would kill their story. John, the president said he planned on interviewing some folks for a couple or a few positions on his administration, but he did not elaborate as to which positions he was interviewing for. John.
More palace intrigue ahead. Brian Yenes, thank you. A major development in the Russia probe as Jerome Corsi, an associate of Roger Stone and longtime ally of President Trump, says he's been discussing a possible plea deal with special counsel Robert Mueller. Here is former Deputy Assistant Attorney General Bob Driscoll on what this could mean for the Mueller investigation.
It does seem like it's coming down to the end. You know, the top of the pyramid would be Trump. He submitted his questions. It looks like it should be winding up. And unless we see, again, I've been saying this all along, unless we see more than we've seen publicly, and there's always the chance there's something out there we don't know about, none of this seems to connect to Trump-Russia collusion.
Garrett Tenney is in Washington live now with more. Garrett, how does Jerome Corsi fit into Mueller's investigation?
Well, John, Jerome Corsi's connection to Roger Stone is key here. Investigators have been trying to connect the Trump campaign to Russia. And to do that, they've been looking into any possible contacts that Trump associates had with WikiLeaks. Back in 2016, Corsi told friends that he believed WikiLeaks had the emails of Clinton campaign chairman John Podesta and would release them as an October surprise, which is what happened. Prosecutors want to know if Corsi had a secret contact with WikiLeaks and if he had used that to pass information along to Trump advisor Roger Stone, who then could have shared it with the Trump campaign. Corsi denies those allegations, but says after cooperating with Mueller's team for the past 2 months, he's now discussing a plea deal. Last week, he said he believed he had walked into a perjury trap.
I fully anticipate that the next few days I will be indicted by Mueller for some form or other of giving false information to the special counsel, but I'm going to be criminally charged. And this has been one of the most frightening experiences of my life.
Yeah, Corsi is one of several people close to Roger Stone that Mueller's team has interviewed already, John.
So what is Roger Stone saying about Corsi's potential plea deal?
Well, Roger Stone has really been a central figure in Mueller's probe of the WikiLeaks emails because of comments he made during the campaign suggesting that he was in contact with Julian Assange. He later walked those comments back, but in a radio interview Friday, Stone again denied having any connection to WikiLeaks or to Russia.
This idea that Jerry Corsi could implicate me, there's simply no evidence whatsoever that would show that I knew about the source or the content of any allegedly stolen emails or any allegedly hacked emails that were published by WikiLeaks. Just not so.
Stone has repeatedly said he expects that he will be indicted at some point, likely along the lines of perjury as well, but he maintains that Mueller is on a witch hunt for something that simply isn't there. John?
Garrett Tenney in Washington. Thank you.
You got it.
House Judiciary Committee Chairman Bob Goodlatte speaking today after the committee issued subpoenas to former FBI Director James Comey and former Attorney General Loretta Lynch in their ongoing investigations into the Justice Department and FBI's conduct leading up to the 2016 presidential election. Comey wants to answer questions from the committee in public and not behind closed doors. Here is Goodlatte's response.
Well, I think it's particularly telling that the former director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation says he would resist a lawfully issued congressional subpoena because it is done in the same fashion that every investigation he ever conducted as an investigator and as director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, which is behind closed doors.
Meantime, Goodlatte also speaking about his likely successor as Judiciary Chairman, New York Congressman Jerrold Nadler. Nadler, a known critic of President Trump, has Goodlatte worried about the status of those investigations.
I am very concerned that Mr. Nadler, who has not done anything other than criticize this investigation since it started a little over a year ago, is not going to follow through. And it's too bad because, you know, Democrats should be just as concerned about Mr. Comey's actions in 2016, including his decision to reopen the Hillary Clinton investigation and tell the whole world a week before the election.
Nadler is expected to become the new chairman of the House Judiciary Committee when the new Congress begins in January. The catastrophic wildfire in Northern California is nearly out after several days of rain there, leaving searchers to comb through now muddy ash and debris for signs of human remains. That massive wildfire claiming 84 lives so far, with the number of unaccounted for standing at just under 500. And wildfire-weary evacuees, many living in tent shelters since being forced from their homes, wonder what will happen next.
My house is gone, so I don't have anywhere to go. So I feel pain and I feel anger, and I just really wish that somebody were able to give us a place to go. There's been such an outpouring of help and support and food, and people are bringing coats and umbrellas, and then all those things are so helpful, but at the end of the day, I have nowhere to go.
Jeff Paul is live in Paradise, California, one of the hardest hit areas. So much to put back together there, Jeff. How's the recovery process going?
Well, John, for the first day in what seems like several days, we're finally getting some sun. The weather starting to work in favor of search and recovery crews. No more rain. The winds have really started to die down. And as a result, those crews are out in higher numbers and able to work a lot faster as they sift through that wreckage. We're also seeing more utility workers out and about. They're clearing some of those downed trees as well as those power lines and power poles. And that's only allowing this community to better get back on its feet with so much devastation still in this community. We talked with one of those crew members about how they feel they're making progress on this recovery. Take a listen.
Things kind of start slow. The logistics are crazy in a big event like this. And then as soon, we get into it and then things really start to progress real quickly, once everything comes together.
Now, nearly 14,000 homes in this fire, the Camp Fire, were destroyed. So it's going to take a long time until this community can even get close to recovery.
And
John?
what about the residents? When can they get back in?
Yeah, we've heard some different varying reports that that's going to start happening more and more. In fact, a few hours ago, we got one report that authorities are going to let some of those residents return home, but just for a 24-hour period. That's going to allow them to at least see if their home was burned to the ground or if there are some items that are salvageable, or in some cases, maybe pick up pets that they didn't even have time to come back for. And we're seeing more of those search and rescue crews as well as animal rescue crews out and about feeding some of these pets. And for folks at home who've never been through a devastating and fast-moving fire like this, some might question why on earth anyone would leave their pets behind. But the answer to that question isn't always so obvious or easy.
A lot of dogs were taken. People grabbed their dogs, but some people weren't home when the fire exploded, so they had to leave they couldn't go back. They couldn't go back because the fire department would not let them go into a fire.
Now, that number of dead has stayed the same. It is at 84 for the last 24 hours, and they're hoping that it stays that way. It's an unfortunate number no matter how you look at it. Also, the number of unaccounted for still in the hundreds, but that continues to go down as they cross more and more people off of that list. John?
Jeff Paul, Paradise, California. Thanks. Federal scientists releasing the National Climate Assessment Report, which gives a terrifying look into how climate change is affecting the nation. The report says extreme weather and climate-related events could worsen in the future and significantly impact our economy. Ellison Barber has more.
John, climate change is negatively impacting the United States now more than ever. That is according to the latest National Climate Assessment. The report found that many extreme weather and climate-related events have already become more frequent, intense, and widespread. The authors of this report say they expect many of those events to continue to increase or worsen.
And this warming trend can only be explained by human activities, especially emissions of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere.
If there is not substantial and sustained global mitigation and regional adaptation efforts, the report warns, climate change is expected to cause growing losses to American infrastructure and property and impede the rate of economic growth over this century. This report is over 1,600 pages. It looks at the impacts of climate change now and in the future. It says that some aspects of our economy could see some improvement in a warmer world, but long-term, officials say it's going to hurt the U.S. economy. According to the report, weather and climate disasters have cost the U.S. nearly $400 billion since 2015. This sort of assessment is released every 4 years. It's mandated by Congress and the Global Change Research Act of 1990. 13 federal agencies are part of the group that worked on this report. The Trump administration released it, though the report seems to contradict some of President Trump's views on climate change.
Now, another big question is it possible that climate change is a real issue here?
Well, we'll be looking at everything. I mean, it is land management and it's forest management, really, is what you mean. But we're going to be looking at every factor, and we're going to get to the bottom of it, and I think we can do it fairly quickly.
Economies and industries that are said to be particularly at risk are things like agriculture, tourism, and fisheries. John?
Ellison Barber reporting. Ellison, thanks. Former Vice President Al Gore slamming President Trump, claiming the president tried to bury that report on climate change just out. Gore criticizes the report's release immediately after Thanksgiving rather than in December, as had been originally planned. In a statement, Gore says, "Unbelievably deadly and tragic wildfires rage in the West. Hurricanes batter our coasts, and the Trump administration chooses the Friday after Thanksgiving to try and bury this critical U.S. assessment of the climate crisis. The president may try to hide the truth, but his own scientists and experts have made it as stark and clear as possible." Widespread outrage over a looming tax hike, sparking deadly protests in France. Why the price of diesel has become such a contentious issue there. Plus, a new winter storm threatening to derail holiday travel.
Opinion shows daily and documentaries and specials that tell the real stories behind the headlines.
Exclusively on Fox Nation.
Plus, get limited time available exclusive merchandise and Fox Nation special access to events with your favorite personalities. Stories done right, politics done right.
Fox Nation, opinion done right.
Become a founder now.
Now, a Fox News weather alert. Holiday travelers fresh off a frustrating day of traveling to reach their Thanksgiving destinations. They're now bracing for delays on the return trip home, thanks to a massive winter storm. The system threatens to dump heavy snow from the Great Lakes to the Rocky Mountains. AccuWeather meteorologist Paul Williams joins us with a look at the forecast. Paul.
Well, it's looking rather grim at this particular moment because we're looking at blizzard warnings that's including Colby, Hastings, Kirksville, and then we have at least winter storm warnings. Now, the difference between these two, we're looking at 6 to 12 inches of snow here, 6 to 12 inches of snow here, and blowing snow and visibility blocked for a 3, perhaps even 4-hour period. And then we have various winter storm advisories in effect. Now, when you take a look at the radar right now, it looks innocent, but it's not. It's in fact, as the sun goes down and the temperatures will drop, all of this green representing the rain is going to change over to blue representing the snow, and it's going to change over in a mighty way and create the opportunity of, unfortunately, dangerous travel for us along I-25, I-80 particularly, as well as I-70. Travel is going to be really compromised along I-35. Power outages because of these very gusty winds, and there's going to be a problem with drifting snow. Here's a look at our forecasting models. We start at 11 o'clock Central Time. You see all this green is going to change over to the blue that I was just telling you about. As you see that slide through going into early Sunday morning, you see this deeper blue here? Well, that's where the 6 to 8 and 12 inches of snow, that's where that can kick in. And we're looking at that then collapsing over the Chicago area by Sunday evening, and then it continues to move towards the northeast as we go into Monday. And this is producing what I call a three-eyed monster because widespread heavy rain throughout Ohio, portions of Pittsburgh, as well as western portions of Pennsylvania. This slice of mix, we're talking about icing that could rival at about an inch. And then we have snow on the backside of this, blizzard conditions giving us poor visibility. This is indeed a serious storm. And by the way, in the Northeast, we have problems with icing there as well.
Wow. Paul Williams, thanks for the heads up. We go now to Jackie Heinrich, who's been talking to travelers at LaGuardia Airport here in New York City. Jackie, the airlines are letting passengers change their flights for free?
John, the airlines are doing damage control. They're bracing for delays, and they're allowing passengers to change their tickets for free in some Midwestern cities that are expected to bear the brunt of this storm. If you're traveling on Delta, American, United, or Southwest out of Chicago, Cedar Rapids, Des Moines, Milwaukee, or several more cities, check with your airline for a free flight change. While you're at it, you might want to check with hotels if you need to extend your stay. Chicago is a hub for a number of airlines, including American, United, and Southwest, so winter weather there has the potential to impact far reaches of the country. It has people heading home to the Windy City scrambling to beat the storm.
I really don't like traveling during the holidays, but we decided to travel this year, so I wanted to get out of town ahead of the big crowds on Sunday. So hopefully we'll be out on schedule and back home for the snow tomorrow.
While winter weather and holiday travel are never a good mix, this year could be the worst in recent memory. According to AAA, 54.3 million people are traveling 50 miles or more this holiday weekend. That is more than any year since 2005. Here at LaGuardia, 95% of flights on American Airlines are full. Similar statistics for other airlines. So airline officials are really suggesting to folks, if you can get out early, you should. John?
And it's not just the flights. The roads are going to be a problem, too.
They are. The worst delays are expected in Boston, San Francisco, and New York City. According to mobility analyst INRIX, travel by car could take 4 times longer than a normal trip, with the worst times to drive happening after 4 p.m. in most cities. That's 4 p.m. tomorrow. Gas prices are also higher than the last 4 Novembers on record, with the national average at $2.79 a gallon, although those prices did not seem to deter people from travel, with overall automobile travel up 5% from last year. So with this storm set to hit, it's also a good idea to check your car for dead batteries or for flat tires. AAA is estimating they'll rescue 360,000 stranded motorists over this holiday weekend. So it's safe to say whether you're getting home by plane or by car, you're probably not going to be alone in your travel woes. John?
Good advice, Jackie Heinrich. Thank you. A huge explosion jolts a St. Paul, Minnesota neighborhood. Security footage capturing the moment a house is blown apart, spewing an enormous fireball. The blast leveling the house, blowing out windows and walls of nearby homes as well. Firefighters pulled an 80-year-old man from the wreckage. His family says he's in the hospital with burns. Fire officials are investigating the cause, but they say most likely it was a gas explosion. We're getting an update on a Black Friday shooting at a mall near Birmingham, Alabama. Authorities now saying a 21-year-old man shot and killed by a responding police officer is not believed to be the gunman. That goes against their original assessment. Investigators also believe there's at least one shooter still at large. The initial gunfire left 2 people injured. Police say they regret the inaccuracy in their first statement to the media, and the officer who shot the 21-year-old has been placed on leave pending the outcome of an investigation into the incident. A protest turns violent in Paris as demonstrators clash with police and fire and smoke fill the streets. We'll have the latest on that. Plus, Roger Stone reacts to the news about his associate Jerome Corsi, who's been negotiating with special counsel Robert Mueller about a possible plea deal. What could this mean for the Russia investigation?
Let's be clear. This is no witch hunt. As the president
and water cannons trying to break up demonstrations in Paris and making dozens of arrests as thousands gathered today in the capital, venting anger against rising fuel taxes and Emmanuel Macron's presidency. Protesters say French people are fed up with increasing taxes.
The big companies like McDonald's should pay. They pollute. They are the first polluters of France. All the big companies should pay taxes as everybody does. IKEA and others, and also the big bosses, but especially the wealth tax. That's important. The government suppressed the wealth tax, and now they make the ordinary people pay. That's not normal.
Ryan Chilcote has the latest there.
John, tens of thousands of protesters have hit the streets to protest, not just in Paris, but in cities and towns right across France. They're easy to spot. They're wearing those bright yellow vests. They're actually the high visibility vests that French motorists have to keep in their cars in case of accidents. Why are they angry? Well, French President Emmanuel Macron intends to raise the tax on fuel in the coming year. What's the big deal? Diesel, that's the fuel of choice in France, cost the equivalent of about $6.30 per gallon. Now, of course, they use liters and euros in France, but I've converted it for you. Most of that is tax. The tax went up by 30 cents a gallon this year, and if Macron gets his way, it will go up by another 25 cents per gallon starting January 1. He says these taxes are needed to discourage people from buying cars that contribute to climate change, but many French people, particularly those who live outside of the capital, that need their cars to drive to work and stores, say they're just too high. Macron was already battling a perception that he is out of touch with working class people. Some critics even refer to him as the president of the rich. Now, protests, even riots, are not particularly unusual in France, but these demonstrations that have been going on for a week now are alarming many French people. Already 2 people killed, hundreds injured. John?
Reporting from London. Thanks, Ryan. To the United Kingdom, where Prime Minister Theresa May writing an open letter to the British public asking them to back her Brexit deal to bring reconciliation for the whole country, no matter whether they voted for Brexit or not. This move comes after May agreed to Spain's demands over the future of Gibraltar. The crucial vote on her deal is expected to take place in Parliament next month.
I have no idea what this is about, other than to say that the assertion that Jerry Corsi knew in advance that John Podesta's emails had been obtained and would be published would be news to me, because he never told me anything of the kind, and he never obviously passed on any such documents.
That's former Trump advisor Roger Stone on the news that his associate Jerome Corsi is in negotiations for a plea deal with special counsel Robert Mueller. This comes nearly 2 weeks after news broke that Mueller was likely to indict Corsi for perjury in his investigation into Russia's interference in the 2016 presidential election. Joining us now, Julia Manchester, news reporter for The Hill. Julia, the devil is always in the details in these matters. What do we know about what Jerome Corsi might have told Robert Mueller's investigators that has him talking about a plea deal with them?
Right. So, John, what we're seeing now from what Corsi has been saying is essentially a confirmation of reports that he was working to get to a plea deal with Mueller. Now, Jerome Corsi could prove to be a crucial link in this investigation in linking a member of Trump's orbit or the Trump campaign, namely Roger Stone, to WikiLeaks. We saw that Roger Stone during the campaign, reportedly bragged about having connections to WikiLeaks, that he had this back channel. He also predicted in a tweet saying that Hillary Clinton's former campaign chairman, John Podesta, would spend some time in the barrel, hinting at the fall. And then we saw that the email leaks turned out to occur in October, what many of us in the campaign business call an October surprise. So Roger Stone, Jerome Corsi, who also made a similar prediction, have denied that they had any knowledge of it, just saying that it was a prediction. But what Mueller's team really needs to know at this point is whether Jerome Corsi has a secret source linking him to Julian Assange or those in WikiLeaks.
But it's not illegal to have a secret source. I mean, that's what we do in journalism all the time. What would be illegal about Jerome Corsi getting some information from WikiLeaks?
Well, I think him being involved in, I guess, that hack could, somehow link him to the leak of emails that we saw in the 2016 Democratic National Committee and John Podesta's emails. So I think that's what Robert Mueller's looking in right now. If we see him being honest if Robert Mueller finds him to be honest about this, we could see that he could potentially come out not unscathed, but with a plea deal in this scenario.
John Sale is a former Watergate special prosecutor who spoke on Fox News earlier today. He says he's not necessarily all that impressed with what prosecutors seem to have here. Listen.
In the federal system, what do plea discussions mean? It means cooperation, which is the key to the jailhouse. And the only way you do that is if you say what the prosecutor wants to hear. And in this case, clearly it's to implicate Roger Stone with advanced knowledge of the hacking and of the leak. And Corsi's not giving that. So he's going to be indicted. And I don't think the special prosecutor has advanced the ball at all.
So John Sale is not all that impressed, but Roger Stone seems to be, I don't know, a little nervous, shall we say?
Yeah, we saw Roger Stone kind of speak out again about this yesterday. He was saying that Corsi was essentially being pressured, that he'd never had this he never had this conversation with Corsi, etc. But I think a lot of observers would look at this and say, well, Roger Stone's being nervous, and if he knows that Jerome Corsi didn't say this, that would mean he would have had to have some sort of conversation with him. So I would want to know, and I'm sure Mueller would want to know, what conversations those two are having throughout this process.
Everyone assumes that this investigation is winding down now that the president has given written answers to some of Mueller's questions. Bob Driscoll, a former deputy assistant attorney general, says the question is, where does this probe go next and who does it target? Here's Bob.
I think the real question is whether there's any inner circle people left. I mean, the president can't be indicted while he's in office. We know that. So that Mueller could write a report concerning the president, possibly make a referral to Congress, but that wouldn't go anywhere given the political situation. The real question, for me at least, is what's going to happen with Kushner and Don Jr. and those folks. Are they in the clear or not? And if it stops with what we've seen publicly, it just doesn't seem like there's a ton there.
So again, another, high-level former law enforcement official who doesn't seem to think the Mueller investigation has developed a lot of legs here.
Right, John. So we've seen a lot of chatter around that controversial Trump Tower meeting that Jared Kushner and Don Jr. organized with that Russian lawyer, and I believe it was in June or July of 2016. But we haven't seen much fruition, in recent months in terms of the Mueller investigation. So it seems right now that Roger Stone is kind of the main focal point of all of this. So whatever happens with Corsi and Stone, it seems like that will eventually lead to the end of this, or could, but obviously there's many surprises in all of this as well.
Well, Roger Stone is close to the president, but putting Roger Stone in the vice doesn't necessarily implicate the president.
No, it does not. Roger Stone is, as we've discussed before, is close to the president. However, he's more in that orbit. Roger Stone doesn't work in the White House, and he's not, I guess, directly connected with anyone right now. So it doesn't directly implicate the president, no.
Julia Manchester, reporter for The Hill. Julia, thanks.
Thank you.
The clock is ticking as Congress tries to avoid a partial government shutdown. House Republicans are hoping to strike a deal before the end of the year while they have the majority. But with the deadline less than 2 weeks away now, Democrats are not going to make it easy. Kristen Fisher has details.
The Republicans are in charge. And if the government shuts down, it's on their back.
The congressional clock is ticking. And if members of the House and Senate want to keep the lights on, they'll have to act fast. December 7th is the deadline for Congress to pass a bipartisan spending bill to avoid a government shutdown. The big sticking points, funding for the border wall and protecting the special counsel's investigation.
With respect to the Democrats here in the Senate and in the House, that we hope that they will decide that they want to play a constructive role and put up a record of legislative accomplishment rather than spending all their time launching investigations.
The American people are watching closely, and they want to make sure that justice is served, and if there's a political effort to stop that, they'll notice.
The Democrats have hinted at leveraging their votes by attaching protection for the special counsel to the year-end spending bill. And there's a threat from retiring Republican Senator Jeff Flake, who vows to hold up any more judicial appointments until the Senate votes on the Mueller protection bill. With only 3 weeks left, the post-midterm agenda is looking like a lame duck. And despite Democrats wiping out the Republican majority in the House, President Trump is making his own threats when it comes to the border wall.
We're talking about quite a big sum of money, about $5 billion. If I was ever going to do a shutdown over border security, when you look at the people coming in, this would be a very good time to do a shutdown.
I think that's going to be crucial. We're going to make sure, do everything we can in the lame duck to get that funding in.
Senate lawmakers agreed to provide $1.6 billion for the border wall. But as Democrats prepare to take back the House, they're refusing to give in to the president's demands.
We believe if President Trump stays out of the appropriations process, we can have a good bipartisan agreement and the government can move smoothly forward.
So as it stands, the House and Senate have passed 5 of the 12 spending bills. Some of the remaining measures expected to make it to the floor include tax cuts, the Farm Bill, and criminal justice reform. In Washington, Kristen Fisher, Fox News.